At the grand funeral in Lamora, everyone came dressed in their finest clothes. The air was thick with music, whispers, and the smell of incense. But in the back row, almost hidden, sat a woman in deep purple traditional attire, Sophia. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she held her head high. People turned to look at her, some pointing, others whispering behind their hands. "Isn't that the village girl?" one woman muttered. "Why is she even here?" Safia didn't respond. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her heart breaking. That was her husband, Jabari, lying in the golden coffin. But no one seemed to care that she was his wife. His wealthy family had pushed her to the background from the moment they arrived. They didn't let her say a word, not even at the funeral. She wasn't asked to speak, wasn't introduced, just ignored like she didn't matter. But what they didn't know was that Safia carried a secret, powerful one that would change everything. She may have been silent on the outside, but inside her truth was burning, waiting for the right moment to be heard. And that moment was coming. The speeches went on and on. One by one, Jabari's family members stood up, telling stories, sharing jokes, shedding a few tears for the man they claimed to know so well. The microphone passed from hand to hand like a trophy, but not once did it reach Safia. She sat there quietly, in the corner like she was nobody. The love of her life was gone, and yet she felt like a guest at his funeral. When Jabari's sister stood up, her voice rang through the hall. "My brother was too kind," she said with a fake tear. "He even married a village girl in secret. We never understood why." The crowd laughed uncomfortably. Safia looked down, trying to hold in her tears. Her hands trembled in her lap. That village girl was her. She wasn't just a secret. She was Jabari's wife, the woman who stood by him when no one else did. But Safia didn't speak. Not yet. She had every reason to shout, to scream, to stand and tell them all the truth. But she didn't. She just sat there, quiet and calm, with a storm inside her chest. Because Safia knew something they didn't. Something powerful. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strength. And when the time was right, they would all know who she truly was. As the funeral continued and more people spoke, Safia's mind drifted away from the noise. Her heart traveled back to the days no one else saw, days that lived only in her memory. She remembered the first time she met Jabari. He wasn't rich then. He wasn't powerful or admired. He was weak, sick, and forgotten by the world. He had lost everything. His business, his friends, even his family had turned their backs on him. But Safia didn't care. She saw the man behind the pain. He had collapsed by the roadside near her village, and she had taken him in. Day and night she cared for him. She cooked for him, bathed him, prayed for him. She used the little she had to buy his medicine. While others ignored him, she stayed. Not for money, not for status, just for love. He used to hold her hand and whisper, "You saved me, Safia. You're my home." She gave him her youth, her strength, her heart. And slowly he healed. He stood back on his feet and began to rebuild his life. But when he rose again, his wealthy family came back into the picture. And with them came shame and secrets. They didn't want Safia. She didn't fit their perfect image. They saw her as a stain on his success. Now at his funeral they spoke of everything, his career, his kindness, his smile. But not a single one of them mentioned the woman who brought him back from the edge. Safia. The one who loved him before the world remembered his name. Safia was never what Jabari's family wanted for him. From the first day they heard her name, they called her a nobody. A village girl with no class, his sister had said. "She doesn't belong in our family," his mother warned. It didn't matter that she had saved Jabari's life, or that she had loved him with all her heart. To them she wasn't good enough. When Jabari started getting his life back together, his business growing again, money coming in, respect returning, his family came back too. But they didn't want Safia to be part of his new life. They wanted him to hide her, to pretend she didn't exist. They told him she would ruin his image. "You need someone who fits in," they said. "Someone who looks the part." Jabari, caught between love and pressure, made a painful choice. He asked Safia to stay hidden just for a while. "I just need time," he whispered to her one night. "I'll fix this. I'll make things right. Just trust me." And because she loved him, Safia agreed. She stopped showing up at his events. She stayed away when his family visited. She let herself be erased because she believed his promise. She believed that one day he would stand up for her. That one day he would tell the world she was his wife, his heart, his home. But now, sitting at his funeral, surrounded by people who never knew the truth, Safia wondered if that day would ever come. Or if her love story was meant to stay hidden forever. That night still haunted Safia. The night Jabari collapsed. He had come home late, looking tired and pale. She begged him to rest, but he smiled and said, "Just a little more work, my love." Minutes later he fell. Right there in their small living room. His body hit the ground with a thud that still echoed in her ears. Safia screamed his name, shaking him, crying, panicking. But she didn't freeze. She grabbed her shawl, called a bike man, and rushed him to the nearest hospital herself. All night, she sat beside his bed, holding his hand, whispering prayers through tears. The machines beeped softly, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She just stayed there, begging God to give her one more day with the man she loved. No family came. No friends. Just her. Alone. Then the doctors came in the morning, with heavy faces and heavy words. Jabari didn't make it. That's when everything changed. Suddenly, the hospital hallway was full of his family. People who hadn't called in months. People who never knew the pain he carried. They didn't ask her what happened. They didn't thank her for being there. They just took over his body, his funeral, his name. They pushed her to the side like she didn't matter. Like she wasn't the one who had held him in his final breath. And now, as they cried the loudest at his funeral, Safia sat quietly, remembering the night they weren't there. The church was packed. The stage was decorated with flowers, and the microphone passed from hand to hand as Jabari's family members stepped up one by one. Each of them gave glowing speeches. They spoke of a man full of strength, wisdom, and charm. They called him a family pillar, a business giant, a man of great dignity. People in the crowd nodded, some even wiped away tears. But as Safia sat quietly in the back row, her heart broke over and over again. Not because they praised Jabari, but because everything they said felt like a lie. Or at least not the full truth. They talked about his success, his generosity, his leadership. But they skipped the parts when he was weak and broken. They left out the nights he cried in her arms, the days he doubted himself, the times he almost gave up. They didn't mention the years he was missing from their lives. Those years when he had only Safia. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her lips pressed tightly together. She wanted to stand up. She wanted to scream. That's not the whole story. But no one had invited her to speak. They didn't see her. They didn't want to. Only Safia knew the man behind the suit and smile. The man who had been rejected and forgotten. Who rose again because someone believed in him. Because she believed in him. But today they erased that part of the story. And the woman who helped him rise sat in silence, holding her truth like a flame in the dark, waiting for someone, anyone, to see her. As the final speaker stepped down and the pastor moved to close the funeral, a man in a dark blue suit quietly stood up. He didn't rush or shout. He simply walked to the front with calm confidence, holding a brown envelope in one hand. The crowd began to whisper. Who is he? What's going on? The man took the microphone, cleared his throat and said, "Before we end today, there's one more voice Jabari wanted to be heard." The room fell silent. Safia looked up slowly, confused. Her heart skipped a beat. The man continued, "My name is Mr. Biko. I'm Jabari's lawyer." And before his passing, he left behind a personal will with very clear instructions. He opened the envelope, unfolded the papers, and placed on a pair of reading glasses. Gasps filled the room as he began to read. "In the event of my death, I ask that my wife, Safia, be acknowledged and given the respect she deserves." The lawyer read out loud. "She is not just my wife, she is my everything. The woman who stood by me when I had nothing. When everyone else left." People turned, eyes wide, searching the crowd until they found her. Safia, still sitting in shock, hands covering her mouth. The lawyer wasn't finished. "Safia is the only person I trust with everything I own," he said. "She is my legal wife and the sole heir to my estate." Suddenly, the entire atmosphere shifted. The whispers stopped. The family that had pushed her aside went pale. And for the first time that day, all eyes were on the woman they had ignored. The woman whose silence had just shaken the entire room. Gasps echoed through the hall like a wave. People sat up straight. Some turned to each other in disbelief. Others stared at Safia with wide eyes. The lawyer's voice remained calm as he continued reading Jabari's will, line by line, word by word, each one hitting harder than the last. I, Jabari Nsiko, being of sound mind, declare Safia my legal wife and the only person I trust to carry my legacy, the lawyer read aloud. Everything I own, my businesses, properties, accounts, goes to her. She stood by me when I had nothing. She deserves everything now that I am gone. Chaos began to stir. Jabari's older brother jumped up. This must be a mistake. What about the family? He shouted. Another aunt shouted. We didn't even know about this so-called marriage. But the lawyer stayed calm. He raised a hand. I have legal documents, video recordings, and signed witness statements. Jabari made this decision himself. Everything was done properly. This will is final. And just like that, the room fell quiet again. Safia sat frozen, her eyes full of tears. She hadn't expected this, not today, not like this. Her heart was still grieving, still aching. She didn't want riches. She didn't care for property. She had only ever wanted to be seen, to be loved openly, to be respected. Now, in front of the very people who once called her nobody, the truth stood tall. Jabari had spoken from the grave, and he spoke for her. The woman they tried to erase was the woman he left everything to. And suddenly, the widow they ignored became the most powerful voice in the room. Safia sat there stunned. Her heart was racing, her hands shaking. The whole room was looking at her now, the same people who had whispered, insulted, and ignored her. The lawyer gently walked over and handed her the microphone. He wanted you to speak, he said softly. For a moment she just stared at it. Then slowly, with tears rolling down her cheeks, she stood up. Her voice was low at first. I don't know where to start, she said, her hands gripping the microphone. I never imagined I'd speak at my husband's funeral like this, not after being silenced for so long. The crowd sat still, eyes locked on her. Jabari wasn't just a great man in public, he was a kind, gentle soul in private. I met him when no one else wanted to look at him. He was broken, sick, and alone. And I loved him not because of what he had, but because of who he was. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. I cooked for him, prayed for him, stood by him through every storm. And when he got back on his feet, I stayed behind the curtain because he asked me to. Because his family didn't want me around. She wiped her tears. Do you know what it feels like to love someone in silence? To be hidden like you're ashamed? I stayed quiet out of love. But today, he gave me my voice back. The hall was silent. You could hear people sniffling. Even those who once judged her looked down in shame. I didn't come here for money, she said. I came here to say goodbye. And now finally I can. Thank you, Jabari, for loving me when the world wouldn't. And thank you for letting them see me. Then she sat down, her face wet with tears, but her heart finally free. When Safia finished speaking, the room went completely silent. No one moved. No one whispered. Even the ones who had looked at her with disgust just an hour ago were now staring at the ground, ashamed. The woman they had ignored was no longer invisible. Her words had cut through every wall, every lie, every proud heart in that hall. An elderly aunt, who had once called her that village girl, wiped a tear from her cheek. Jabari's older brother, who had shouted at the lawyer, sat with his hands clasped tightly, lips pressed shut. Even Jabari's mother, who had never spoken a kind word to Safia, looked like the wind had been knocked out of her. Safia hadn't shouted. She hadn't insulted anyone. But her voice, soft, broken, honest, had hit harder than any scream ever could. She had spoken with grace, not bitterness. With dignity, not revenge. And that moved everyone. For the first time they saw her. Not as a poor girl from a village. Not as a mistake Jabari made. But as the woman he loved deeply. The woman he trusted. The woman who had walked with him through fire when no one else dared to stand by his side. In that silence something shifted. Respect was born. And Safia, the woman they once tried to hide, stood tall in their hearts. No longer a shadow, but the light that revealed the truth. Just when the room had settled into silence, a voice suddenly cut through the air. "This is all a lie," a young woman shouted, standing from the second row. All eyes turned to her. She was dressed in bright colors, heavy makeup, and high heels that clicked loudly as she stepped forward. "I'm the real woman in Jabari's life," she said boldly. "Ask anyone. He was with me, not her." Gasps echoed through the hall again. Some people looked at her in shock. Others looked at Safia with confusion. Safia didn't move. She just stared at the woman, her heart pounding but her face calm. The woman went on, "He bought me a car, paid my rent, gave me everything. I was with him in the city. Ask his friends." But the lawyer didn't flinch. He calmly pulled out another file and opened it. "Miss, please sit down," he said. Jabari already knew this day might come. And he left proof. He held up documents and photos for the crowd to see. "These are receipts of monthly payments Jabari made to you. Here is the contract you signed, a silence agreement. You were paid to act as his girlfriend in public, to protect his image. Not because he loved you, but because his family pressured him." The woman's face dropped. The color drained from her cheeks. "And here," the lawyer added, holding up Jabari's handwritten note, "he clearly says, I never loved her. My heart has always belonged to Safia." The room gasped again, but this time not in confusion. It was clear now. The woman slowly backed away and left the hall in shame. And once again all eyes returned to Safia, the one woman Jabari truly loved, the one no lie could erase. The silence after the lawyer's final words was heavy, almost sacred. Then, slowly, something incredible happened. Jabari's oldest uncle, a man known for his pride and stern face, stood up. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Safia, we were wrong." He looked directly at her. His eyes filled with regret. "I judged you without knowing your heart. And today I saw the truth." Safia's eyes filled with tears again. But this time they were different. Not tears of pain but of release. One by one, other family members stood too. A cousin who had once mocked her bowed her head. An aunt who had refused to greet her came forward, gently touching Safia's hand. The same people who once whispered behind her back now stood in front of her with respect. Some apologized. Others simply looked at her with soft, ashamed eyes. Safia didn't gloat. She didn't smile with pride. She just nodded gently, her heart steady. She wasn't bitter. She didn't need revenge. Her name had been cleared. Her truth had been heard. And that was enough. In that moment she wasn't the village girl anymore. She was Safia, the woman who loved deeply, stayed loyal, and walked through fire without losing her grace. And finally the world saw her for who she truly was. The crowd had left. The noise was gone. Only the gentle sound of the wind and the quiet rustle of trees remained. Safia stood alone at the graveside, dressed in the same deep purple she had worn all day. Her eyes were tired, her body heavy, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in years. She slowly knelt beside Jabari's fresh grave, the soil still dark and soft. In her hand she held a single white rose, the same kind he used to bring her from the roadside when they had nothing but love. She laid it gently on the stone that now carried his name. Her fingers brushed the carved letters and she whispered softly, "Rest, my love." They finally heard me. A tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't from pain, it was from peace. The wind picked up slightly, blowing through her scarf and carrying her words into the open sky. She closed her eyes and for a brief moment she felt him. Not in body, but in the warmth of the sun that suddenly peeked through the thick clouds. A soft ray of light fell right across the grave, as if heaven itself had opened to say, "I see you." Safia smiled through her tears. She didn't need crowds, she didn't need applause. She had said goodbye in her own way. Not in silence, not in shame, but with truth, dignity, and love. She rose to her feet, brushed the dust from her knees, and took one last look at the man who had loved her in secret, and finally honored her in the open. And with that she turned and walked away, not broken but whole. Months passed, but Safia's story never faded. People in Lamora still spoke of the funeral, how a quiet widow stood tall and changed everything. But Safia didn't stop there. With the inheritance Jabari left her, she made a decision that came straight from her heart. She bought a small building in the center of Lamora and turned it into something powerful, a legal aid center for women. She named it the Sophia House, a place where women could walk in with their heads down and walk out with hope. Inside there were lawyers who listened, counselors who cared, and rooms where broken stories could find healing. Safia made sure every woman who entered felt seen, heard, and valued. She said to them what she once wished someone had said to her. "You matter. You're not alone. Your voice is powerful." Word spread fast. Women came from nearby villages. Some came in tears. Others came in silence. But all of them came because they believed in the widow who found her voice and used it to lift others. People who once whispered behind Sophia's back now stood in line to shake her hand. Young girls looked at her like a hero. Even the same family members who had once ignored her proudly introduced her to others. But Safia didn't do it for attention. She did it for every woman who had ever been told to sit quietly and stay hidden. Because now she wasn't just Jabari's wife. She was Safia, the woman who turned her pain into purpose. Among the crowd at the funeral that day was a young journalist named Lima. She had come to cover the ceremony, expecting a typical story about a respected man's passing. But what she witnessed moved her deeply, especially the moment Safia stood up and shared her truth. Lima sat in the back, typing quickly, tears running down her face as she captured every word, every detail. That night, she posted the story online with the title, "The Widow They Tried to Silence, Safia's Truth." Within hours, the post exploded. People across Africa began sharing it. Thousands commented, sending messages of love and support. Women wrote, "She spoke for all of us." Men admitted, "I judged too quickly." Radio stations picked it up. Bloggers wrote follow-ups. Safia's face was everywhere. Photos of her standing at the graveside, her hand on her heart, her eyes full of grace. But while the world saw her as a symbol, Safia felt something even greater. She felt free. Not because of fame or attention, but because her truth was finally known. Her voice had reached beyond the walls that once held her back. What started as pain had become purpose. What was once silence had become a movement. And as Safia sat one evening outside the Sophia House, watching women walk in with hope in their eyes, she smiled softly and whispered to herself, "He heard me. They heard me. Now, I hear me too."